Hey, it's Drybear, and I finished my latest Diablo 4 build, so that's what we're going to be going over today. And by popular demand from many people in chat, on live stream, and on comments in YouTube, asking for a viable endgame Blood Necromancer build, today we'll be going over my Crimson Impaler Bloodlance Necromancer build. But first, time is running out to get access to the one-time reward of the Wand Transmog skin and the back attachment for Sorceress/Sorcerer. On my Twitch channel. I'm live every single day on twitch.tv/Drybear. Come by and hang out, and by watching, you'll for free get these items as access as well. And the mount skin is still available through the end of June, so if you come by the live stream and gift 2 gifted subs to the channel or any other channel that's on the list of viable channels, you'll be able to get this one-time skin. It will be available after the end. I believe it's July 2nd is the end of this. So as the name suggests, the Crimson Impaler takes advantage of the Blood Lance as an option here. And one of the reasons why Blood Necro was being requested for a build guide from many people in chat and the community is because many people have written off Blood as being unplayable or just too weak to fit through the end game. And so the challenge was before me to see if I could find a viable end game build for Blood, starting with Blood Lance, and then we'll be moving on to other parts of the Necromancer kit. So I tried everything under the sun for this. It was actually probably the hardest build that I've been able to make so far on trying out different variances of vulnerable, crit damage, attack speed, bonus health, things like that. And as I started working through vulnerable and crit chance, crit damage, it started to feel like, why wouldn't I just be running a bone build? It doesn't make much sense to try and force the Blood Lance to fit into that. There is actually an okay build you could run that focuses on attack speed and crit chance and vulnerable, but in every possible way, I would argue that it is inferior to Bone Spear or any bone build that you can run. That being said, the other end of the spectrum was an interesting test for science. I wanted to see if I could invest everything possible into Blood Lance and Blood Necro and see if I could get it to work as it was meant to be, which is using Fortify, Overpower, and Overpower damage. And to my surprise, I actually could. I mean, you could push with this build. I don't even have upgraded items here. My stats aren't perfect. I'm missing a legendary from this, and I was still clearing Nightmare 60 plus, doing plenty of damage and clearing it just fine. So I would say that this build, the Crimson Impaler, is actually endgame viable. The thing is, you'll have to understand there's some lessons that I learned in this process and some things that you really have to kind of understand on how Overpower works, how the build works, and maybe kind of close your ears to what the community is saying about what's viable and what's not. So let's do a brief overview of the gameplay, how the build works, and the process, the loop, and all that. Then we'll dive into the skill build, the Paragon build, and the gearing and stats, and then I'll leave you with some improvements to my build overall that I think are going to help people that use the build. I'm constantly trying to improve these. So the way Blood Lance works is it is a fast-firing, low-cost projectile that will fire out and hit an enemy. It will then impale that enemy with a Blood Lance. They now have a Blood Lance sticking out of their body. You can see it sticking out of them. When you fire another Blood Lance and it hits a target that is already marked or impaled by a Blood Lance, it'll travel through that target and then hit targets behind it. Additionally, you can see here, so I've actually slow this down a little bit and pause right here. You can see that we have the Shambling Corpse and then the Bloat Fiend on the side here. So we have the mobs here. So if you look at these mobs, there actually is a lance that's sticking out of their body and they are currently impaled. The passive effect of Blood Lance is when you damage a target, it will also damage all targets that are currently lanced. So when I hit this corpse in front of me, you can see that there's this like blood link that goes over to the other target that's lanced, and this shows you that the damage is being shared. What's really cool about this part is that if you were to overpower strike this target, all targets that are currently lanced will be hit by the exact same overpower. So if you hit them with a big, fat, massive overpower, it'll hit all targets that are currently lanced, which is pretty cool. We also have a legendary that makes it so that when we hit a target that's lanced, we have a % chance for that target to shoot a lance off in a random direction, lancing a new target. And we also have a legendary which isn't as good for pure overpower, but still works, which makes the main target take bonus damage based on how many targets are currently lanced. So the more you have lanced, the more damage you do. which means that when you get a dense pack, the pacing for this gameplay is way different than anything else you'll see. So I'll come into this room here. This is like a general encounter that you'll have. 2 fog gates appear, you get locked in. So I'll show you what it feels like to play an overpower build. You have all these targets, you pull them in. I'm gonna curse them both so they're all in there. And then you'll see as I start firing the blood lance, nothing's happening, nothing's happening, nothing's happening. But what I'm doing is I'm actually lancing each individual target, proccing additional lances and spreading them out. And then eventually we'll get a guaranteed overpower, which will start blowing damage on everyone and then everything's dead. And so I think this is why overpower at first gets a bad rap, is people may not understand how it works, or they're also not building their character properly to take advantage of it. But you could very easily get some very respectable damage out of it. You just have to understand how the property of overpower works. And it's actually super satisfying to see the numbers appear on screen for this build, because I've actually gotten to the point where if the mob density is high enough, I've started to lag the server with how many procs that are going off on screen. So you start seeing nothing, 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 and then all of a sudden you get these crazy flood of numbers and it starts blowing up everything on screen. It's super satisfying to play. On top of that, it being an overpower fortify build is actually incredibly tanky, even when you're pushing high nightmare, which makes it, again, another satisfying option for people that like to have that kind of tanky play style. So let's go through the build, everything that I've learned, the best legendaries, the best stats, everything, and how to play it, and some lessons learned and tips and tricks on how to function with the build and bring out the best out of it as well. And I'll start with the one sheet that I've created here. Again, as I'm improving the build guides and making them better, I wanted to have this here. A lot of people had been asking for a reference for proper stats and everything, and I've gone even further to add in notes, bad sigil affixes, best incense and elixirs to run, and other things like that. So this is the one sheet for the stat and the legendary spread out. So if you're looking for a reference or you're trying to use this while you build, this is what you want to look for the gearing aspect. We'll go through all of this when we go into gearing after we get through the whole build, but I just wanted to leave this here so you can kind of screenshot it or use it for reference if you'd like. All right, let's go through the skill build. There's going to be some surprising things in here that even surprised me when I started working with the build a good bit. You're going to notice that we're not going to have things like Corpse Explosion or Bone Prison. We're not even going to have an ultimate. None of those ended up being necessary, and I do believe that this is the best version of Bloodlance that exists currently without new information coming along. So let's talk about it. We're first going to start up here with Hemorrhage. This is actually one of the few builds that exists where the basic builder is insanely strong for many reasons. We're an overpower build, which means that we care a lot about our current health and our current fortify. Hemorrhage actually has plenty of synergies with this that make it work really, really well, which is pretty cool. The first one is going to be that after you pick up a blood orb, and we're going to be picking these up a lot with this build, your next Hemorrhage does a large AoE around the target you hit. You get additional essence for every target hit, and you'll also get bonus fortify as well. And so what we'll be doing throughout the build is not only trying to maintain the uptime of our damage reduction from the aspect of might, which means that when we cast a basic ability, we get damage reduction, which we need. We'll also be casting this periodically because it'll do an AoE, give us blood orbs, and give us fortify, and give us bonus essence, which is really cool as well. We're gonna come down here, and our main vessel of damage is going to be Bloodlance. A lot of lessons learned on this one. The core idea of this build originally was that you can use Supernatural Bloodlance. After you cast Bloodlance 8 times, your next Bloodlance will overpower and will spawn a Blood Orb. So the original idea was that if you could get attack speed high enough for this, theoretically, you could actually be overpowering constantly. And what I found was that it actually wasn't better this way. You actually, if you commit too much to doing Bloodlance damage and Bloodlancing as much as possible, you sacrifice too much on your actual overpower hit doing enough. So you want to find a nice balance between attack speed and overpower damage and willpower so that you can actually do nice overpower hits to get that clear there as well. The other thing that I'll note on this, as after a bunch of testing, is that the level of Bloodlance actually doesn't matter for the overpower hit. You can put 1 point into Bloodlance and your overpower will still do the same exact damage. I think that overall it feels better to have a couple points into Bloodlance. You can even have it on your gloves if you want to get higher levels of it, but the primary source of damage is always going to be your overpower. So if you wanted to min-max this, you could take some points out of Bloodlance. Just note that it's going to make it so that when you're not overpowering, you're going to do even less, which is going to hit pretty hard. Next, we're going to pick up Unliving Energy, Max Essence. You can actually pull this down. This just makes it a little bit easier when you have high essence generation to hold on to it, but you could pull 2 points out here if you really wanted to. and then we want imperfectly balanced. What shocked me about this one when I was testing it, this makes your core skills cost more essence but deal more damage. Originally, based on this description, I thought that you could run without imperfectly balanced because your core, like the damage of Bloodlance doesn't matter. However, this effect, your core skills deal 15% X increased damage, applies to the Overpower that Bloodlance procs. I don't know if this is intended or not. The way it reads, it seems like it wouldn't be, but it does apply to the Overpower, so we 1000% want imperfectly balanced maxed out. And I would even go as far as to say is you can get imperfectly balanced on your amulet to make that Overpower damage even higher. But this damage multiplier applies to Overpower, so we absolutely love it. Coming down here, we have a few extra points to play with in this build because most of what we have is already kind of set up. I do like running Hued Flesh because it allows us to do Corpse Tendrils a lot more often, and we also have plenty of benefits. We're going to take advantage of all of the proc bonuses that Necromancer has for standing near corpses that we're not consuming. Because we're not consuming corpses with this build at all, we get massive damage increase and massive damage reduction for standing in a field of corpses. Hued Flesh not only gives us more corpses to play with, and it helps us against bosses where we want to have the actual spawn of corpse tendrils, but it also gives us the ability to proc an easy corpse and then start with big mob packs as well. Blood Mist is an easy pickup here. What's really cool about Blood Mist is that Blood Mist itself can overpower, and even with 1 point in this, if you use your Rathma's Vigor, which makes it so you overpower every 15 seconds, you can use it on Blood Mist, and it does ridiculous AoE damage. It'll do maybe 10% overpower of your Bloodlance proc every single tick several times a second to every target with no target limit in an area. And I've actually cleared packs using Blood Mist alone because it does that much damage. We also want the overpower reduction of Blood Mist, and we also want the corpse leaving behind, which allows us to get that damage reduction and damage bonus scaling going on a new pack. And it also means that if we can't get any procs off Hued Flesh, we can get some corpses going to use corpse tendrils because you really want to be able to pull those mobs together in order to survive. If you find that you're more patient and you're willing to wait for corpses, you can actually run Fortify here and use Blood Mist to stack it up. I just found that it wasn't necessary. We get so much Fortify with this build that we don't actually need it. Coming down into the next tree, which is going to be the biggest shocker here of all. I tried every current meta representation of Necromancer that exists right now. Corpse Explosion for spending, Bone Prison for vulnerable, Bone Prison for Fortify, Bone Prison for gaining essence, having all kinds of modifiers in here, doing Bone Storm for damage reduction and crit chance, using your Blood Wave for extra blood damage, which can trigger your Drain Vitality, which gives you Fortify, and will also spawn Blood Orbs. There's plenty of synergy there. However, because this build is so naturally high in attack speed, I think the best version of this build runs both curses. The reason for this is because you have such high attack speed, you can actually cast Decrepify and then Iron Maiden in under the blink of an eye. When your attack speed procs off your Rathma's Chosen attack speed bonus, you can go curse right into the next Bloodlance, and it's so fast, it's so easy. But what's great about this is not only are we going to pick up Amplified Damage, which gives us bonus damage to cursed targets, which is nice. This is a really good scaler for us. But also, we're going to get Iron Maiden, which doesn't cost any essence. For every enemy that doesn't have Iron Maiden on them when you cast it, it will give you essence. So if we run low on, so we spam Bloodlance until we're out of essence, cast Iron Maiden, it'll give us 50 to 100 essence depending on how dense the pack is, and then we can keep casting. But also, because our Overpower relies on our current HP and current Fortify amount, when you kill an enemy that's cursed by Iron Maiden, you heal for not a flat value, 5% of your maximum life. And you'll see once we get to gearing that with this Overpower build, we're stacking max life to the absolute limit. With poor gearing optimization, I currently have 11.8k life. And so 5% of that every time I kill an enemy that's cursed is huge, massive, keeps our overpowers high, keeps our damage high. And remember, with an Overpower build, your HP value is your damage. So staying at max HP is paramount to dealing maximum damage with an Overpower build. Then we're also going to run Decrepify. The main value here is twofold. One is you get damage reduction. And you actually want to run extra points, like your Helm can get extra points of Decrepify. This gives you more damage reduction, but at base with 1 point, Decrepify is a 20% damage reduction, which you absolutely need as you start pushing higher and higher nightmares. I would say anything over 45 or 50, you need to have a lot of damage reduction. Otherwise, you just get one shot by everything. So having this here is nice. It also will give you a chance to stun, and it also will give you a chance to lower your cooldowns with Lucky Hit, and we have tons of Lucky Hit in this build. This is awesome because not only do we get a CC out of it, but if you're running aspect of the Umbral, which I recommend you do, you'll get essence from the slow and or the stun, which means that you're gaining essence when you decrepify targets, which is huge. We also want the close damage reduction. Distant damage doesn't seem to affect overpower in any meaningful way, so we're going to skip over that, but the damage reduction is super useful here. Now we're going to come down into the Macabre tree. This one is really huge for us, and we're actually going to pick up Corpse Tendrils. Putting extra points in Corpse Tendrils, people wonder why I do this, and I try to explain it every time, but the reason being is that it's for the cooldown reduction, right? So if I took all the points out of this, the cooldown can go up to 10 to 12 seconds. If I put a couple points into Corpse Tendrils, the cooldown goes down to like 7 or 6 seconds, which means makes a huge difference in your ability to pull targets in and get more value out of it. But even more so from just being able to pull targets is going to be the benefit of slowing them for Umbral and primarily getting blood orbs. We use blood orbs like crazy in this build. And the fact that Corpse Tendrils has a chance to spawn a blood orb every time it goes off, even if the target is unstoppable or has diminishing returns on crowd control, means that we can create a sea of blood orbs every time we pull, which allows us to proc all the other benefits. I tried Vulnerable so much, and I know how good Vulnerable is for builds that use it, and it's one of the best scalers in the game, but I found that as you push higher and higher, every point and investment that you put into crit and Vulnerable in this build simply makes it weaker. You get scaling off of Vulnerable, it is good, but in difficult content, it starts to fall off for overpower builds, in my experience. Next, we're going to pick up almost all of our blood passives here. The only one we're not going to grab is Transfusion, because this is for minions, and this build doesn't use minions. So we're going to go in and we're going to pick up Gruesome Mending. When you're below half HP, you increase your healing from all sources. This is potion healing, self-healing, proc healing, and blood orb healing, which is huge. We want, when you're healthy, all your blood skills deal 18% more damage. Coalesce Blood and Tides of Blood you can get ranks of on your amulet, and I recommend you do. I think with Tides of Blood you can get +2 on, which is probably your best bet because it makes your blood skills do 30% bonus damage. You can make that up another 10 or 20% if you get extra ranks. So you can actually get this to 25% increased overpower damage while you're healthy at base, which doubles to 50. So your overpower damage goes crazy high. Best in slot, I think, on amulet is to get +2 Tides of Blood on this because it'll make it so much better. And then the secret hero of this build is going to be Drain Vitality. On Lucky Hit, hitting an enemy with any blood skill, which you're doing all the time, has a chance to fortify you for 8% of your base life. We have high percent base life, or we have high max life, but this is your base life, but still it's 8%, which is pretty high, and it gives you that fortify. You'll notice that the more aggressive you get with this build, spamming blood lances and hitting targets, your fortify just starts to fly up, and that's super crucial for surviving the difficult content. Then we're going to come down here and we're going to get no ultimates. I actually couldn't find a single ultimate that was worth sacrificing another utility ability for. Bone Storm is great. It gives you damage reduction. It gives you critical strike chance. We don't use crit for this build at all, so we don't really care. Army of the Dead has no synergy other than creating corpses, and Blood Wave takes way too long to reset. Even with cooldown reduction, you can get this down to like 30 seconds. I even tried the legendary on Ring, where you can make it so picking up a blood orb reduces your ultimate cooldown by 1 second. It still wasn't worth it. The biggest value of Blood Wave in most encounters was the knockback, because it would interrupt charge mechanics like from big snakes, revenants, corpse fiends, the big bloated blobs that run forward. The knockback here would interrupt that, which means if you had a bunch of them running towards you, you could stop it. It just wasn't worth it. It's better to have 2 curses in this build than it is to have Blood Wave, but it is an option if you want to run Blood Wave. It will spawn a couple blood orbs, nowhere near as much as you're going to spawn on your own, but it does spawn a couple of them, and you can use it there. But there's some cool passives here. Obviously, anytime you don't run minions, you want to think about running standalone. This gives you 18% damage reduction when you have no minions. Massive, we love it. And then if you're sacrificing your warriors and your mages, you want to run Memento Mori. It gives you more scaling on that, which we're sacrificing all of our minions for this build. It's going to be really good. And on top of that, we can also run Inspiring Leader. This says that after you've been healthy for 4 seconds, you and your minions gain 12% attack speed. The key here is you gain 12% attack speed. So as long as you've been healthy for 4 seconds, you get 12% attack speed. Attack speed works great with this build. More blood lances means more overpowers, means more fortify, means more blood orbs, means more synergy. The attack speed is super valuable as a stat. And lastly, we're going to pick up Rathma's Vigor for this because it gives us max life and it guarantees our overpower hits, which is huge. And this is part of the gameplay loop, is utilizing Rathma's Vigor. And I actually would recommend just either ignoring this or using it for Blood Mist, because it can give you a lot of value in AoE for that specifically. When it comes to stats, and I have tried every possible combination you can think of with this, I think your primary stats by far are going to be maximum life. Remember, max life scales up your maximum fortify. It also scales up your overpower damage. It scales up how much you heal yourself for on percent scaling for those bonuses as well. Willpower is huge because it increases healing received, resource generation, and overpower damage. You can see, like, I don't even have an upgraded ring. This has none of the stats that I want on it. I just replaced the gloves. I just replaced the shield. It doesn't even have a legendary I'm using. Most of this is just kind of work in progress, but currently I have 1400% overpower. You could get this well over 2000% very easily if you're pushing into tier 4, and it makes this build so much stronger, which is really cool. So if we come back to our handy dandy build sheet, let's go over the legendaries and some alternative options that you can use, plus all the stat priorities that you want to pick up for this. We'll start, this is laid out in your actual paper doll setup for everything you have set. So let's go through it in normal order. Your helm, your chest, and your pants are your primary defensive items. And we want to take advantage of this because remember, more current HP, more fortify amount equals more damage, which means that the tankier you get, the more offensive and threatening you become, and you want to strike that good balance there. Again, I've tried vulnerable and crit damage with this and crit chance, and I think it actually makes the build worse because you can't actually maintain your current HP or your fortify, you can't protect it, and your overpowers are significantly weaker when you do that, and it just doesn't seem to work. So our primary stat that we're going to want to pick up everywhere that we possibly can is going to be max life. We can get max life on helm, we can get it on rings, we can get it on our pants, we can get it on our chest, and we can also get it on our shield, which is going to be huge for the build in making us tankier. We survive more mechanics, and we can eat through a lot of things as well. So for helm, I recommend running Protector, which is the legendary, which gives you the barrier every 30 seconds. This helps give you some buffer time where they have to chew through the barrier instead of chewing through your fortify or your current HP, which makes you do less damage, which is nice. For helm, stat priority, I would look at max life, willpower, and all stats, and then percent damage from blood orb. I actually found the scaling on percent damage from blood orb surprisingly good. I thought it was going to be garbage, but it's actually pretty decent, and we're picking up blood orbs all the time, and so that damage scaler does have some value there. For chest, we also want max life, damage from blood orb, and then also run percent overpower damage and damage reduction while fortified. Damage reduction while fortified gives us a nice, insane modifier on our damage reduction, and it's bigger than regular damage reduction because it has a conditional, and we're fortified all of the time, and so we should be getting some good value from that. And then from chest, I like running Disobedience, which is the legendary that makes it so that when you deal damage, you gain percent armor. Any build that hits frequently enough, if you can hit 100 times in 4 seconds, you can get full value out of Disobedience. So if you're a burst build that doesn't hit often, you want to run something else, but Disobedience works great because we hit so freaking often. For gloves, I like Hungry Blood. This is the one that allows it to split when it hits other targets, which is this one here. When it hits an enemy that is already lance, it has a chance to fire a blood lance at a nearby enemy. I actually tried this on Amulet as well to get a 30% chance. It wasn't worth it. 20% is just fine if you can get it. This just gives you a good option for AoE, especially when you pull targets into the major pull. Then for gloves, attack speed is huge, percent overpower, percent lucky hit, and then I actually really like running percent lucky hit, restore primary resource. If you run this on your gloves and your shield or your offhand, you can actually get pretty often some nice chunks of restore primary, and this gets better the more lucky hit that you get. You can also run ranks of Blood Lance on your gloves. I don't think it's worth it. It won't affect your overpower, but it does make it easier for farming easier mobs as it increases the damage of it. But in general, I think attack speed, overpower, and lucky hit are going to be your primary stats for gloves. On pants, we want Aspect of Might. Every time you use your basic builder, your hemorrhage, you'll get 20% damage reduction, and we're using it regularly throughout the build, which is good. Max life, damage reduction while fortified, percent damage reduction, and willpower, which gives us healing received, resource generation, and most importantly, overpower damage. For boots, I like the aspect of the eluding aspect. This makes it so that when you become injured while CC'd, it will cleanse you of CC and give you unstoppable. This is almost required for High Nightmare when there's large amounts of CC going on. It just helps you break out of those. For the bonus evade on the boots, I'd recommend either the bonus evade charges, so you can have 3 when the boots are fully upgraded, or attacks reset the cooldown on evade. The movement speed one is probably the worst for this build. You don't really need the movement speed. Dodging more often is more important because it means that you can spam Blood Lance, dodge into a Blood Orb, spam Blood Lance, dodge into a Blood Orb, and keep going through that until you're done. For the stat priority on boots, resource cost reduction is great. It means you can spam more Blood Lances, fortify generation, willpower, and all stats. For your weapon, you want one hand and a shield. You can run a focus if you really want to, but I think the shield is better. The block chances are nice, and shield can give you more max life because it can proc. You can roll max life on it, and then when you put a gem in it, it'll be max life instead of overpower, which is a double. It's a double dipper, right? Max life is overpower damage. Overpower is just the damage. So for weapon, I want a wand from this because it gives us percent lucky hit on it. We also want Bloodseekers, which is the legendary that makes it so your main target takes more damage based on how many targets are lanced. So for those big elite packs with lots of mobs, it gives you a nice bonus on the main target. Then you want percent overpower, willpower, percent damage to stunned, and all stats. What shocked me about this build, I tested it extensively, percent core damage has no impact on your overpower from Blood Lance. So it doesn't do much for this build, but percent damage to stunned will. And because we're stunning with our Iron Maiden, as well as our Decrepify, as well as our Corpse Tendrils, for those big mob pack pulls, the damage to stun helps you clear a lot of those as well. And then we want all stats again. By the way, most builds will not run all stats, but I think for this one, all stats works because we know that willpower gives us resource generation, overpower damage, and healing received. Intelligence gives us skill damage. Strength gives us armor. Tanky equals damage in this build. And then dexterity will give us dodge, which is pretty decent. And then crit chance, which doesn't really matter for us at all. For the amulet, we want to run percent overpower, 2 Tides of Blood, which is the overpower scaling on blood skills, super strong. Damage reduction while fortified, and then percent cost reduction on essence, which is really good. And then for the legendary, I love running Rathma's Chosen on this slot. This is the one that gives you the increased attack speed after overpowering. If you run it on your amulet, it goes up to 75% attack speed, which means that when you proc and overpower, for the next 4 seconds, your blood lances fly out at an insane rate, which means you're applying lances to more targets more quickly. You're also proccing more bonus lances that flack off the main target. And remember, every 8 blood lances is a guaranteed overpower, so you're getting through that rotation faster. For rings, you want max life, overpower, lucky hit, and damage from blood orbs. And max life and overpower and lucky hit are the required ones here. You can run others on the percent damage from blood orb if you want. There's a couple choices. You can get resource cost, resource generation. I just think the damage is what's most needed here. And then for your 2 legendaries on rings, I would recommend Aspect of the Umbral, which makes it so that when you CC a target, you get essence generation. And I recently just got a 4 Umbral. It was my first one. I was using the Codex 1 Umbral for so long. It's a hard one to find. I recommend running Obols for rings to get this, but once you get it, it's super cool. And then you can run Potent Blood, which is every time you pick up a blood orb, if you're at max life, it gives you up to 20 essence. So what you'll do is you'll run through a bunch of blood orbs, get max essence, get all your bonuses, get heal up, get crazy fortify, and you're good to go. A special mention here, I don't have this ring, but it should work great with this build, which is the unique ring, Starless Skies. This makes you so repeated casting of your core skills cost less and less and less, which could work in a very similar manner to Umbral. So if you have Starless Skies and you want to try it in this build, it should work just fine. Then for your alternative, for your secondary gearing, rubies in everything except for accessories gives you max life and percent overpower in your weapon. For rings and amulet, I recommend armor. You can also run all resists here. There is a conversation going around in the community right now around resistances and how bad they are. Resistances are very bad for damage reduction. They actually don't provide much damage reduction at all. However, what I found is in the high nightmares, what they do is they reduce the stacking effect of the negative status that you have from elemental effects. And this can actually be crucial. If you don't have enough resources in high nightmare, cold enchanted enemies will freeze you in one shot. And then you're just stunned forever. So if you're a barbarian or a druid and you can get unstoppable all the time, maybe you don't care and all you care about is getting damage reduction from armor. But if you're like a rogue or a sorc or a necromancer, primarily, you may want to consider running resistances. You'll take more damage overall, but it'll prevent you from getting, 3 health bars worth of poison stacked up or getting instantly frozen anytime something cold touches your toe. So just a consideration there. And then for best elixirs, you want overpower damage, max HP, resource cost, and then attack speed. For best incense, max life and willpower. And then the sigil affixes you want to avoid most are overpower resist. This goes up to like 60% damage reduction on overpower, which is, you just do a different sigil. And then physical damage resist is the same because all of your damage is considered physical damage as well. And then the usual annoyances like resource burn and like suppressor are ones that you want to consider avoiding, but you can work through those if you really wanted to. For Book of the Dead, we're going to sacrifice our defenders to get non-physical resistance, crit chance doesn't matter, and shadow damage doesn't matter. For skeletal mages, this is your best one. We're going to sacrifice bone mages to get 40% more overpower, increased by our passive and our skill tree. And then for golems, it's pretty close between blood and bone. Blood will give you max life, which gives you more survivability, more overpower damage. Bone will give you attack speed. Both of these are very good for the build. I've tried these both extensively, and I would say that in most cases, max life wins out. It's easier to survive, more overpower damage, and you can make up your attack speed with your amulet, your Rathma's Chosen, which gives you fat amounts of attack speed, which is really good. But something to consider is that you can run both of these if you really wanted to. For Paragon, your primary glyphs are going to be Blood Drinker. What's great about Blood Drinker is it gives us Fortify every time that we pick up a Blood Orb, and this is maximum life, not base life. So the more max life you get, the more the Blood Orbs will Fortify. So when you run around grabbing a bunch of Blood Orbs, you'll get a bunch of Fortify. Also on top of this, it means that you can just go into Blood Mist, grab a bunch of orbs, and reset your full max Fortify and heal from the Blood Orbs and get Essence from Potent Blood on your ring. So it just makes crazy synergy here. Also, we love Dominate. Dominate, the more you invest into it, the more value you get out of it. You should be able to get some crazy, insane bonuses from Dominate. You'll be able to get a lot of value out of that. You can get upwards of 300% overpower damage from Dominate, depending on where you put it. In the board specifically, I like putting it in Scent of Death, and the build that I have that puts it there will show it for you as well. I also like Gravekeeper in this. For each close corpse, you get 12% increased damage total for 6 corpses nearby. We're spawning corpses constantly, and we're not consuming them. This gives us crazy amounts of damage. This will give you actually a large increase in attack power if you're standing near at least 6 corpses. So keep that in mind. It is surprising how good Gravekeeper is if you're not consuming corpses. I also love running Imbiber. I started running this recently towards the end of the build creation, and I like this a lot for 2 reasons. One, increased damage while healthy is okay. It's not the best stat in the game, but it's nice to have extra damage there. But having 30% increased potion healing is huge because remember, every time we pick up a blood orb, when it is not, when we're at full HP, we get essence. And so being able to get very fast up to max HP. So what I've started doing is popping a potion right before I go in to grab blood orbs. And that makes almost guaranteed that you're going to be able to get full value out of those blood orbs. You can jump, if you get 5 blood orbs at max HP, you'll go straight up to 100 essence. It'll fill up fast. It's really, really easy. Super strongly recommend picking that up. So Imbiber I like a lot. And then the last one that you're going to want is going to be Undaunted. This one is huge, and we'll put it at the end of the Paragon tree, but this one's really good. This means that for every 5 willpower in range, you get increased damage while fortified. And primarily what we want is you gain damage reduction the more fortify you have. So when you're fully fortified, you get an additional 10% damage reduction while fortified. More damage reduction while fortified keeps us alive, keeps our damage strong. Now I have the full Paragon build up on the D4 Builds website, link down below in the description and in the comments with everything listed in here. It'll have the glyphs that we just talked about, all the different nodes. You do want to pick up things like Scent of Death. This gives you increased damage with no corpses, or damage reduction when you're near corpses, which you will be most of the time. We also want to come and get as much max life as we can. We get double value from this. Remember, it makes us tankier and gives us more overpower damage, which is really good. We like having overpower damage as much as we can pick up, more max life. We want to pick up these same nodes here that have these overpower. And we also get value from blood begets blood. If you pick up 3 blood orbs for the next 5 seconds, you deal 15% increased damage. And that does apply to your overpower as well. So we like that. We also like the bloodbath. You'll notice this difference more than anything else in your entire existence. When you proc a natural overpower, it'll be like, so while you're playing, you'll sometimes you'll proc an overpower and you'll wonder why it's smaller than the other ones. It's because it was a natural 3% overpower. You overpower occasionally on its own. When you do an attack that's guaranteed to overpower, so either through your Rathma's Vigor or through your Blood Lance, the 9th hit after you shoot 8 times, it does 50% increased overpower damage. And this is a true multiplier. This will do 50% more. It'll calculate all your overpower damage and then multiply that by 1.5. This is insanely powerful. Bloodbath is so good for this build, and you'll notice, like, you'll be able to tell whether you did a guaranteed overpower or a regular overpower anytime you see those numbers on screen, because Bloodbath is just that good. Let's talk about gameplay even more in depth now that we've covered the entire build so you know how to play. The big things are you want to maintain current life and maximum fortify at all times. You have to play safe. You have to position yourself. Pay attention to blood orbs as you see. The biggest tip I'll give you is to always be lancing. Even if it means taking a pause step to stutter step and throw a lance, 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 throw a lance. This is for many reasons. Primarily, you get fortify from it. You're also chewing through that 8 count on blood lance so that you're getting your next overpower sooner. It also means that you're spreading the blood lances around because you want as many targets blood lanced as possible for when you overpower, because it'll spread that overpower to all targets. You might find that if you're not blood lancing enough, you're not doing good AoE, and it's because you're just not keeping up with that rotation in general. Double curse as often as you can. Use Iron Maiden freely, and then use Decrepify after Corpse Tendril to debuff all the mobs, get cooldown reduction. You can use Blood Mist when you get to 15 Rathma's Vigor, and you can do some really insane AoE damage with it to clear some very difficult mob packs, because the overpower on Blood Mist is super duper strong. You want to use, pick up, like, as you're stutter stepping around, move your way towards blood orbs. Pick up blood orbs, shoot. Pick up blood orbs, shoot. And what you can do is, if you're running multiple evades as well, is you'll get the pack together on a Corpse Tendril, and what I'll do is I'll spam a couple blood lances, dash into a blood orb. Spam a couple blood lances, dash into a blood orb, and just keep stuttering around the group and kind of corralling them like a group of sheep as you collect blood orbs, giving fortify, giving bonus health, healing yourself, giving bonus damage. All of that is really, really strong. So you want to be able to do that in order to keep things up. You will run into situations where you have to kill specific objectives like blood blisters or corpse piles, and those can be annoying because you may not get a guaranteed overpower. So again, what I would recommend is just push those blood lances. Blood lance as often as you possibly can. Keep blood lancing, keep blood lancing, keep blood lancing. You'll be shocked how things die. The more you blood lance, the more you'll be able to get to those overpowers and get those big hits to clear things out. At the start of a pull, try to proc a corpse and then back everybody up, then pull the corpse in. And what I noticed is I would want to wait until I proc and overpower before going into the Corpse Tendril combo. Because remember, if you're running Rathma's Vigor, if you proc overpower, you get 75% attack speed, which is huge, which means you want to mark a bunch of mobs with Blood Lance, proc the overpower as Corpse Tendril is coming in, double curse, and then just and the whole group will just explode. Also, when you run into high density situations, what you want to do is just make sure each target is blood lanced. So if you hit one with blood lance, try to spread your blood lances around so you're proccing more blood lances everywhere else. Because every time you pull a pack, like even right there, you saw that one of the mobs I pulled in wasn't blood lanced, which means that the overpower didn't hit him. So you want to kind of spread it around. You want to make sure each person gets a blood lance. You're blood red communist. You want everyone to get a blood lance. Spread it around, hit different targets, make sure everyone gets a blood lance before you start spamming on one target. And that's what I got for you. That's Drybear's Crimson Impaler Overpower Blood Lance build. This build actually works, which blew my mind. I was worried I was going to have to run vulnerable crit with this to make it work, but to my surprise, it actually does work, and I would consider this build viable for all endgame activities. So enjoy. Come by the live stream if you have questions or comments. I'd love to chat with you. And that's all I got for you today. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.